And thank you for joining us today for our Facebook Live. I'm Julia Marvin, and I'm the marketing manager here at Jefferson Center. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Jenn Jordan. Jenn is a crisis counselor for Colorado Spirit, which is our COVID-19 relief program. And with COVID continuing to disrupt our daily lives, and the anxieties, worries, and concerns are more prominent than ever. However, without containment, those fears can really start to become endless. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about catastrophic thinking and what you can do to, help kind of calm your worries. But before we get started, a little bit about Colorado Spirit. It's a community-driven program aimed at providing COVID-19 disaster relief and mental health support to Coloradans. Colorado Spirit offers free and confidential support and counseling, and they can help you with tips and strategies to cope successfully or connect you with additional mental health resources that you might need. Our trained crisis counselors are here to listen and provide support around the feelings that life during the pandemic may bring up, such as worry, sadness, hopelessness, or anger. So like I said, today we're going to be talking a little bit about negative thoughts and emotions, and these are definitely a part of the normal human experience, and they also have a lot of power to influence how you feel. When they're extreme or they affect your daily functioning, that's when they can become harmful for your overall well-being. And so Jenn is here to talk to us about how you can reframe your thinking to combat these thoughts. So Jenn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be chatting with you.
Yeah, so I guess to start, could you talk a little bit about what catastrophic thinking is?
Yeah, so catastrophic thinking, or another word for it is catastrophizing. It is our mind's tendency to think of the worst possible outcome. So, three things that this can involve: the overestimation of the likelihood of a negative event, the overestimation of the terribleness of an event, should that happen, and then the underestimation of our own ability to cope with the event should it happen. So a little bit about this: our brains are hardwired to focus on the bad stuff. So earlier in human history, we paying attention to negative threats in the world was literally a matter of life and death. And so those who were aware of and on guard about the dangers around them were more likely to survive. And this is passed down generations. And so this negativity bias, this, focusing on the bad stuff, it still plays a big part in how our brains operate, even though most of the time we're not presented with that big of a threat as we were generations ago. And so with COVID happening all around us and lives being affected in real and devastating ways, it's especially easy to worry about what could happen. And so this is understandable and it's valid. All of us are experiencing some of that worry to an extent. So the problem isn't necessarily the catastrophic thoughts themselves, but us buying into them, believing their stories, letting them consume us. So when this becomes the norm of our daily lives, it can lead into more serious mental health problems such as anxiety and depression in different degrees. And so that's why it's good for us to talk about just different ways that you can handle these and combat these thoughts.
Yeah, well, and I mean, especially, I know a lot of this is, it's unknown. We don't know. We don't really have a good handle on, what's going to happen next. And so it makes sense that it's really easy, especially in times like this with a pandemic, that it's really easy to go to those catastrophic thoughts. So what are some examples of or common catastrophic thoughts?
Yeah, so one example that I always think of, it helps me understand these catastrophic thoughts, is like in a work environment, after maybe turning a report in later than it was due, thinking, I'm a total failure, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to be broke and lose everything. Or like an example with relationally, declining to go on a date because your thoughts are, well, they're definitely going to find me unattractive or boring, then I'll be single, desperately lonely for the rest of my life. So it's that spiral of thoughts that just gets bigger and more negative, and it draws unhelpful conclusions about oneself or about a situation. So for many of us, like with the unknowns, just as you were talking about with the pandemic, they've magnified this habit if it was already there. So an example of this for the pandemic, you'd just gone to the grocery store to pick up something, and on your way home, you suddenly feel this pang of anxiety and tenseness in your shoulders, and your thoughts are racing like, I shouldn't have gone to the grocery store. I'm definitely going to get COVID. Then my whole household and family is going to get COVID, and we're all going to end up in the hospital. Like just that downward spiral of thoughts. So those are just some examples to kind of get your brain thinking.
Yeah, it seems like it's really easy to do to do that. I have anxiety, so I'm recognizing this very well. But it seems like it would be a really easy thing to do to kind of jump to those catastrophic thoughts and not even recognize that you're doing it. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about the steps that people can take to recognize that they're having those thoughts and then reframe them?
Yeah, so just a few different things, and not, this isn't going to work for everybody, and so that's something that I like to keep in mind is these are just tools that you can use and pull out if they work for you, and try them on for size. But a few things that have been helpful is one, to recognize it. So recognize or just being aware, the awareness piece of, oh, I'm having these really negative thoughts. So that's the first thing. And then asking questions. So getting curious about that kind of thinking. And we'll talk more about what those questions could be that you could ask. And then having faith in your ability to cope during hard times. So tapping into that resilience. And then being kind to yourself. So compassion for the process. Like it's not easy to get out of that kind of thinking sometimes. And then redirecting your attention. So finding healthy ways to distract from it and moving on.
So kind of, okay, so those sound like some really good steps. So I guess let's walk through them one by one. But do you have any suggestions to help people recognize these thoughts?
Yeah, so the first thing to do is, realize when you're going down this line of thinking. So stopping that thought where it is. A few ways that you can recognize it is tuning into those thoughts. So sometimes, like you said, we don't even notice that we're thinking worst case scenario because maybe it's become a habit or whatever. So one way to become aware is to pay attention to your emotions first. So if you notice that you're feeling badly, if you feel anxious or down or something, think about what you may have just said to yourself or a thought that you may be listening to. So tuning in, trying to really get clear on what that thought may be. And then naming it internally or saying it out loud can help. So in that grocery store example, you're in the car and you notice that your thoughts are downward spiraling, and naming it internally or saying it out loud would look something like, okay, let's slow down. I'm thinking worst case scenario. I'm getting anxious over something that may not happen. So that's an example of that. And then another way is just to write down your worries throughout your day in a journal, or a note on your phone is really easy because that's with most of the time with us everywhere we go. And so that's a good one. And then another one is to choose a chunk of the day, maybe like 30 minutes a day, where you're just going to dump all your worries, either again on a journal or writing it down on a piece of paper, and having that contained time to really think about those worries. It gives us that sense of control that our bodies and our brains are actually looking for when everything else feels out of control. And so just having that contained time throughout the day, and then having boundaries around it of, okay, at 30 minutes, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to move on to something else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then the next thing you mentioned, so after we've recognized it, you mentioned kind of starting to ask questions. So what are some examples of questions that people should ask themselves?
Yeah, so again, that's something, it might be helpful to write down these questions and answer them somewhere when you notice you're thinking negatively. So, or you can talk about it with a trusted friend. So a few questions that you can ask yourself is, one, is this something that I know to be true today? What evidence do I have for this thought right now? What evidence do I have against this thought? If a loved one voiced these same worries, what would I tell them? Is it possible that I'm having this thought just out of habit? And then the last one, what other possible outcomes are there? And are any of them positive rather than negative? So really to just get yourself thinking a little bit more realistically So it's not necessarily positive positive thinking. It's just, or changing negative thinking to positive thinking. It's more changing negative to more realistic.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And I really like the one about like if friends or family was saying this, like what would I say to them? Because I think we're so much harder on ourselves
Yeah,
than we are to those around us, and it's so important that we show that same care and love that we would for other people, that we give it to ourselves as well. Um,
absolutely.
so you also then mentioned, having faith in your ability to cope. And so what does that look like?
Yeah, so this looks like finding some sense of comfort and knowing that you've made it through hard times before. So suffering in various forms and degrees is a part of life, and we've all endured it at some point over the years. So when we remind ourselves of this, we can tap into those resources that we've used before to cope. So some things to think about: how have I overcome past hardships? What did I do to get through that? And then how would I respond if this thing did come true? What could I do to make the outcome more positive? What are some actionable steps that I can take? So, and maybe like a little mantra or something you can tell yourself is, whatever happens, I can cope. So it gives you the determination to meet the challenges that life brings.
I love that building resiliency in yourself, and then also reminding ourselves that we have that resiliency, and that you've gotten through hard things before, and that you can do it again. That's really great. So we talked about it, we touched on it just a minute ago a little bit, but what are some things that people should remember in order to be kind to themselves?
Yeah, it is. It can be hard to be kind to ourselves sometimes. I feel that. So just a few things to note is that this kind of catastrophic or negative thinking is natural and it happens sometimes. And so accepting when this kind of thinking comes and then being active in the process rather than just allowing it to consume. So saying, okay, I'm having a catastrophic thought, rather than um, oh man, this is happening again. Oh shoot, what do I do? Adding on to the anxiety you may already be experiencing. So accepting it as it comes, and then learning to decatastrophize won't happen overnight. So it's a process. It takes practice. And so even if you want to, maybe you hear this and you want to try some of these skills, knowing that it's going to take some time. So if it doesn't work the first time, maybe trying it again, a few more times to see if it does relieve at least a little bit of anxiety. Because anything new we try is going to feel uncomfortable and unnatural. So just being aware that it's a process, and then recognizing the anxiety for its function rather than its flaws. And so, like with the example of humankind, centuries before, and how anxiety probably helped them survive, just noticing that there's danger all around me and I need to do what it takes to survive. So it has a function, right? Like it is an energy that can actually help us to achieve things, right? And so when we're anxious, our body is doing its best to prepare for survival in some way. So one thing you can do is to just thank your anxiety for trying to keep you safe. It wants to protect you from a threat that may not be there. And so when we can thank our anxiety, it also helps tap into that, like, just compassionate piece of ourselves that wants to be more compassionate toward ourselves.
I love that. I think that's so great. Instead of seeing it as like something that's bad, seeing it as, something that maybe is a part of you, or, it can be helpful in some ways too. So that, that compassion's so important.
Mm.
So the final step that you talked about was redirecting your attention. And so what are some tips for how to redirect attention and reframe thoughts?
Yeah, so shifting your focus to something healthier and more important to pay attention to can be really healthy. So regular exercise, I mean, that's a big one everyone always says, but it's true. So even if that just means moving your body, like it doesn't have to be going for a crazy long hike or doing an intense workout. It could just be maybe you just wiggle around in your chair, maybe you dance it out, maybe you do some stretching, some yoga, go on a walk. So that will help kind of redirect that attention. And then another thing that I actually do is cleaning a space of your house or just doing something with that pile that's been sitting on the floor of your bathroom. Sometimes it can just help clear the clutter and just make space for, just for you to be. Humor and laughter. So finding things that make you laugh, maybe listening to a comedian or watching that funny show. For me, it's New Girl always makes me laugh. So learning a new skill, taking up a creative passion. I mean, these are things we've all heard throughout the pandemic that are helpful, but there is something to when you are experiencing that, you might just need, a list of things telling you this is helpful. Cuddling with your pet is also helpful. So those are just a few ways that you can just turn your attention towards something healthier than those negative thoughts.
So one other question, you mentioned that like we all do sometimes have catastrophic thoughts and that they are more prevalent, now when we're going through this, global pandemic. So my question is, how could someone know like when the thoughts are becoming too much or are becoming like detrimental? So like, how, what's the difference between, just sort of occasional catastrophic thinking versus something that, like you said, could kind of turn into, mental illness and anxiety and that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I would say if it is something that is affecting your daily functioning in such a way that it feels really debilitating. I know with anxiety, a lot of times, without like medication or help with a therapist, like really these kinds of tools might not help, and that's okay. So I think once you recognize, oh, this is like really consuming me and is affecting um, different aspects of my life, such as work, such as relationships, such as school, whatever that may be for you, that maybe it may be time to start thinking about just more care for you, maybe longer term care with a therapist, talking to your doctor. Medication and therapy has been a really good, it's been proven to be a really good thing to use in conjunction with each other when we're dealing with anxiety. So just recognizing when it's this feels like it is all consuming.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a time when I would say maybe it's time to pay more attention to it and find some outside help.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Jen, we're coming up on time, but is there anything else you want people to know about reframing and thoughts?
Yeah, I think I said this earlier, but I just want to reiterate, like it does not mean switching negative thinking to positive thinking, because especially during COVID, there's a lot going on and things politically and in the world. And so it's just taking that unhelpful thought and finding a more realistic thought. So it's choosing to believe that instead of thinking of the worst possible outcome. So I just want to reiterate that, because sometimes people can hear that and be like, oh, just think more positively. And that's just not helpful sometimes. So, and
Mm-hmm.
these techniques aren't a one size fits all for everyone. It's simply a coping tool to put in your toolbox that you can try on.
Yeah, I think I love that, realistic thinking, and that it doesn't always mean that it's positive, but it's realistic, and that's and it being a tool in the tool. I think that having tools in your toolbox and figuring out which one works for you as an individual is so important. And so, Jen, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. for all of your helpful information. For those of you who have questions or you want more information, please feel free to message us here on Facebook and we'll get back to you. And also remember that no matter what you're feeling, you're not alone. Colorado Spirit and Jefferson Center are here for you. You can call us at 720-731-4689 to talk to one of our Colorado Spirit counselors. And if you need to talk, or you can also go to jcmh.org or cospirit.org to get more information and to get in touch with us. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.